Last year, I spent 6 months participating in I was told was a psychological experiment. I found an ad in my local newspaper looking for imaginative people looking to make good money. And since it was the only ad that week that I was remotely qualified for, I gave them a call and arranged an interview. They told me all I would have to do is stay in a room, alone, with sensors attached to my head to read my brain activity. And while I was there, I would visualize a double of myself. They called it my tulpa. It seemed easy enough, and I agreed to do it as soon as they told me how much I would be paid. And the next day, I began. They brought me to a simple room and gave me a bed. Then, they attached sensors to my head and hooked them to a little black box on a table beside me. They told me through the processes of my visualizing my double again, and explained if I get bored or restless, instead of moving around, I should visualize my double moving around, or at least try to interact with him and so on. The idea is to keep him with me the entire time I was in that room. I had trouble with it for days. It was more controlled than any sort of daydreaming I've done before. I'd imagine my double for a few minutes, then grew distracted. But by the fourth day, I could manage to keep him present for an entire 6 hours. They told me I was doing really well. The second week, they gave me a different room with wall-mounted speakers. They told me they wanted to see if I could keep my tulpa with me in spite of distracting stimuli. The music was discordant, ugly, and unsettling. It made the process a little more difficult, but I managed nonetheless. The next week, they played an even more unsettling music, punctuated with shrieks, feedback loops, what sounded like old-school modem dial-up, and guttural noises, speaking some foreign language. I just laughed it off. I was a pro by then. After about a month, I started to get bored. To liven things up, I started interacting with my doppelganger. We'd have conversations, or play rock, paper, scissors, or I had imagined him juggling or breakdancing or whatever caught my fancy. I asked the researchers if my foolishness would adversely affect their study, but they encouraged me. So we played and communicated, and it was fun for a while, but then it got a little strange. I was telling him about my first date one day, and he corrected me. I said my date was wearing a yellow top, and he told me it was a green one. I thought about that for a second, and realized he was right. It creeped me out. After that shift that day, I talked to the researchers about it. "You're using that thought form to access your subconscious," they explained. "You knew on some level that you were wrong, and you subconsciously corrected yourself." What had been creepy was suddenly cool. I was talking to my subconscious. It took some practice, but I found out that I could question my tulpa and access all sorts of memories. I could even make it quote whole pages of a book I read once, years before, or things I was taught and immediately forgot in high school. It was awesome. That was around the time I started calling up my double outside of the research center. Not often at first, but I was so used to imagining him by now that it almost seemed odd not to see him. So whenever I was bored, I'd visualize my double. Eventually, I started doing it almost all the time. It was amazing to take him along like an invisible friend. I imagined him when I was hanging out with friends or visiting my mom. I even brought him along on a date once. I didn't need to speak out loud to him, so I can carry out conversations with him, and no one was the wiser. I know that sounds strange, but it was fun. Not only was he a walking repository of everything I knew and everything I had forgotten, he also seemed more in touch with me than I did at sometimes. He had an uncanny grasp of the minutiae of my body language that didn't even realize what I was picking up on. For example, I thought the date I brought him along was going badly. He pointed out how she was laughing a little too hard at my jokes, leaning towards me as I spoke, and a bunch of other subtle clues I wasn't subconsciously picking up on. I listened, and let's just say, that date went pretty well. By the time I had been at the research center for 4 months, he was constantly with me. The researchers approached me on that day after my shift and asked me if I stopped visualizing it, and I denied it. They seemed pleased. I silently asked my double if he knew what prompted that, but he just shrugged it off. So did I. I withdrew a little. Hold on, guys. I withdrew a little from the world at that point. I was having trouble relating to people. It seemed that they were more confused and unsure with themselves. While I had manifestation to confirm myself with, it made socializing awkward. Nobody else seemed aware of their reasons behind their actions. Why some things made them mad and others made them laugh. They didn't know what moved them, but I did. Or at least, I could ask myself and get an answer. A friend confronted me one evening. He pounded at the door until I answered it, and came in fuming and swearing up a storm. "You haven't answered when I've called you in fucking weeks, you dick!" he yelled. "What's your fucking problem?" I was about to apologize to him and probably would have offered to hit the bars with him that night, but my tulpa grew suddenly furious. "Hit him," it said. Before I knew what I was doing, I had. I heard his nose break. He fell to the floor and came up swinging. We beat each other up and down my apartment. I was more furious than I'd ever been, and I was not merciful. I knocked him to the ground and gave him 2 savage kicks to the ribs, and that was when he fled, hunched over and sobbing. The police were by a few minutes later, but I told them that he had been the instigator, and since he wasn't around to refute me, that let me off with a warning. My tulpa was grinning the entire time. We spent the night crowing around my victory and sneering at how badly I'd beaten my own friend. It wasn't until the next morning, when I was checking out my black eye and cut lip in the mirror, that I remember what had set me off. Hold on a second, guys. I lost my fucking place. Okay, there you go. Sorry, never mind. My double was the one who got furious, not me. I had been feeling guilty and a little ashamed, but he goaded me into a vicious fight with a concerned friend. He was present, of course, and knew my thoughts. "You didn't need him anymore. You don't need anyone else," he told me, and I felt my skin crawl. I explained all this to the researchers who employed me, but they just laughed it off. "You can't be scared of something yet you're imagining," one of them told me. My double stood beside him, nodding his head, and then smirked at me. I tried to take their words to heart, but over the next few days I found myself growing more and more anxious around my tulpa, and what seemed that he was changing. He looked taller and more menacing. His eyes twinkled with mischief, and I saw malice in his constant smile. No job was worth losing my mind over. I decided. If he was out of control, I would have to put him down. I was so used to him at that point that visualizing him was an automatic process. So I tried my damnedest not to visualize him. It took a few days, but it started to work somewhat. I could get rid of him for hours at a time, but every time he came back, he seemed worse. His skin seemed ashen, his teeth more pointed. He hissed and gibbered and threatened and swore. The discordant music I had been listening to months seemed to accompany him everywhere. Even when I was at home, I'd relax and slip up, no longer concentrating on not seeing him, that he'd be there, and that howling noise with him. I was still visiting the research center, spending about 6 hours there. I needed the money, and I thought that they weren't aware that I was actively not trying to visualize my tulpa. Oh, I was wrong. After my shift one day, about 5.5 months in, 2 impressively men grabbed and restrained me. Someone in a lab coat jabbed a hypodermic needle into me. I woke up from my stupor, back in the room, strapped into the bed, music blaring, with my doppelganger standing over me, cackling. He hardly looked human anymore. His features were twisted, his eyes sunken into their sockets and filmed over like a corpse's. He was taller than me, but hunched over. His hands were twisted. His fingernails were like talons. He was, in short, fucking terrifying. I tried to will him away, but I just couldn't seem to concentrate. He giggled and taped the IV to my arm. I thrashed at my restraints the best I could, but I couldn't hardly move at all. Oh, they're pumping you full of the good shit, I think. How's the mind? All fuzzy? He leaned closer and closer as he spoke. I gagged. His breath smelled like spoiled meat. I tried to focus, but I could not banish him. The next few weeks were terrible. Every so often, someone in a doctor's coat would come in and inject me with something, or force feed me a pill. They kept me dizzy and unfocused, and sometimes left me hallucinating or delusional. My thought form was still present, constantly mocking me. He interacted with, or perhaps caused, my delusions. I hallucinated that my mother was there, scolding me. And then he cut her throat, and her blood showered on me. It was so real, I could taste it. The doctor spoke to me. I begged at times, screamed, hurled incentives, demanded answers. They never spoke to me. They may have talked to my tulpa, my personal monster. I'm not sure. I was so doped and confused, it may have just been more than a delusion, but I remember them talking to him. I grew convinced that he was the real one, and I was the thought form. He encouraged that line of thought sometimes, and mocked me at others. Another thing that I pray was a delusion: he could touch me. More than that, he could hurt me. He poked and prodded when I wasn't paying enough attention to him. He grabbed my testicles and squeezed them until I told him I loved him. Another time, he splashed my forearm with one of his talons. I still have that scar. Most days, I convinced myself that I injured myself, or just hallucinated that he was responsible. Most days. And then, one day, while he was telling me a